Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Science Rundown, the podcast where we discuss current regulatory complexities facing the life science industry and explore innovative ways to overcome those challenges. I'm your host, Nicholas Catman, President and CEO of the FDA Group. Before we get started, here's a quick word about who we are. The FDA Group is a technology and consulting firm that helps life science companies in the areas of regulatory submissions, audit projects, mock inspections, staff augmentation, and remediation. So if you ever find yourself in need, just head over to the fdagroup.com to check us out and get in touch. So today I am speaking with Tammy Sarnelli. Hey, Tammy, how are you doing?
Hi, Nicholas. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for joining me today for this podcast. Before we jump in, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Sure. So, I'm Tammy Sarnelli. I am currently the Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Clinical Quality at Amylyx Pharmaceuticals. Prior to my role at Amylyx, I had a number of years where I was a Senior Director at Biogen, then transitioned to a small organization called BioVeritiv, working in rare disease. And then I was very lucky to work at EMD Serono, which is a part of Merck KGaA, located in Germany. And this has given me quite a large opportunity to work across different organizations and in different therapeutic areas while I continue to hone my regulatory skill set. And I'm excited to be here and excited to talk with you.
This is a unique topic, one we haven't covered yet. So really excited to kind of get your perspective, considering your background and what you have, the shared experiences that you've had. So today, what we're going to talk about is how can regulatory leaders determine whether the greater challenge lies in navigating the complex siloed demands of large organizations or the resource-constrained, rapidly shifting pressures of small companies. So I can definitely see how both of those come with their unique challenges. So without further ado, let's jump right into the first question, which is how do regulatory expectations differ between large organizations and small companies? And how does that shape the day-to-day experience of regulatory leaders?
So thinking about this question, I actually think the regulatory expectations are the same regardless of the organization. The regulatory team is always expected to provide a clear regulatory strategy that guides clinical designs, CMC planning, safety strategies, probabilities of approval, commercial readiness. We often have to scan the external horizon by anticipating hurdles that proactively and adjusting development plans. Um, and we are always researching guidances, regulatory precedents. That occurs whether you're at a large organization or a small organization, because we have to mitigate for potential challenges.
Hmm.
I also think whether large or small, you have to develop a trusted dynamic with the regulators. This allows for quicker facilitation and discussion, supporting paths for product development. And it's critically important to how you develop high quality interactions.
Hmm.
I always say that regulatory teams have to deliver complete, consistent, and persuasive documents, always saying first time on time. And that is at any company, any size that you attend or
Hmm.
that you participate in. Here's where I do think the differences are, and it's the day-to-day workload.
Right.
At a larger company, probably managing multiple programs with multiple indications, different challenges, different approaches. At a smaller company, there's usually fewer programs and sometimes only one.
Hmm.
So the workload does shift. At a smaller company, I find that sometimes you're jumping from one fire to the next. You have to react quickly. You have to move things more efficiently. You're often filling multiple roles, such as developing strategy, writing documents, publishing documents,
Hmm.
and finding references that are needed. In large organizations, those roles may be shared across a larger team. So, to summarize, I actually think the expectations are the same, but the day-to-day experience is different.
Okay. In what ways do organizational silos within large companies create friction, misalignment, or delays for regulatory teams? So we'll focus on the larger group.
This is the one area that makes drug development very difficult for regulatory professionals.
Mm,
I think large organizations have large teams and could be separated by therapeutic area, perhaps by indication. Communication doesn't always happen freely when information doesn't flow between
mm,
teams. It can restrict collaboration, it reduces transparency, and it inhibits knowledge sharing. Regulatory strategy is not a black and white science, and the landscape is always evolving. Without sharing across cross-functional teams, opportunities for adjusting, adapting, pivoting to change, or expediting development may be missed. Um, it also inhibits the way a company approaches health authority interactions. You may have a different approach by each therapeutic area in a large company rather than determining what the company's way will be. I think intentional and thoughtful relationship building and knowledge sharing for regulatory teams is critically important to reduce misalignment and friction.
mm. Great point. Well, let's switch over to the smaller organization. So there, limited resources can have an impact. And so how does that influence regulatory planning, decision making, and risk tolerance?
With limited resources, leaders must find ways to work more efficiently and effectively. It's typical, and I found smaller organizations may be focused on one or two lead programs or platforms. It means that the regulatory planning needs to happen quickly, and it's
Mm,
important to ensure development evolves at a quicker pace for a single program. Decision making may be faster since there are fewer people and consultations that you need to reach alignment. Um, Although reg teams at smaller organizations may try to use expedited regulatory mechanisms, it's harder because you need to be on top of all the ways that health authorities might consider moving a program more quickly. For example, when you think about fast track designations, can your program support that? New pilot programs such as the START program, are you even eligible for those types of things? You often
mm,
have to go and search to see if you will do that. I think risk tolerance is highly product dependent and maybe not necessarily organizational dependent,
mm,
but I do think smaller companies do have to reduce the amount of time internally to
mm.
execute plans while having fewer resources to do so.
Yeah. I actually had a conversation earlier today with one of my neighbors, believe it or not, and she is just switched to a smaller organization, and her whole career was with smaller organizations. She went to a large one because she had been laid off, and then was reminded why she didn't like that. So it's I really like this podcast in terms of highlighting kind of the differences, so that those individuals that might be at that inflection point are able to kind of get be reminded, or if they didn't already know kind of the differences in terms of what they're walking into. So let's continue down that path. So let's bring it back together.
Sure.
So where do regulatory leaders feel the greatest pressure? Would you say is coordinating across many stakeholders, or would you say it's filling multiple roles with limited support?
I'd say there's no greater pressure coordinating many stakeholders or many roles. I think it's just different, and you have to
Mm,
adapt accordingly. Strong relationships, strong communication, collaboration, that's critical in any organization. And sometimes that looks like stakeholder management, sometimes it looks like filling different roles and wearing many hats, as we
mm,
say.
mhm,
And I think pressure for both is finding the right path for the product that can move things effectively and efficiently. So, not really pressure, but it's the ability to adapt and pivot when you have to corral many things, whether it's stakeholders or the need for roles. I think that's where the greatest pressure comes in.
Mm.
It's just that coordination, not necessarily the organization size itself.
Okay, makes sense. How would you say company size impacts the ability to forecast regulatory needs and respond to unexpected changes in the landscape?
I've thought about this question for a few years now. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been at small, medium, and large organizations, and I'm in a very small organization now.
Hmm.
Um, I think the difference, particularly with larger organizations, is that you may have earlier insights into regulatory undercurrents. Given the likelihood you have a regulatory intelligence team, you might have a
Right.
whole team that's looking for these things, and they're navigating and monitoring the landscape, and they know, right, who to involve as they go forward. It's also likely that larger organizations employ government affairs colleagues who are sitting right with the health authorities
Mm.
and gathering information on the landscape.
Mm.
I think there are probably more resources at larger organizations to participate in trade associations like pharma and bio. And since these associations advocate for policy and guidance, larger organization may have a little bit of earlier insight than maybe a smaller one. Um, so at a smaller company like my own, I have to rely on public information that is
Mm.
released in trade publications such as Pink Sheet or Endpoint, constantly scouring the health authorities' websites. But the challenge with that is by that point, when they're published, the landscape has already progressed a little bit further.
Mm.
And so you may be obtaining information that is already advancing. So you're a little bit behind.
Mm.
So you're having to explore constantly opportunities to find potential information or possible changes. But that also allows you to reach out within your network to consult with other professionals on what they're seeing. So I think it's important at a smaller organization to really master the network that you have and try to grow it as much as possible so that you can probably be a little ahead like a larger organization.
Yep, love it. One of the issues with large organizations is the silos that get created within them. So, what strategies have you seen that regulatory leaders have used in order to kind of break down those silos, and were those strategies and tactics effective?
So I will tell you what has worked for me.
Okay.
And when I worked in a large organization, I use multiple strategies for building relationships. I ask a lot of questions, which helps me improve communication and collaboration.
Hmm.
The ability to be curious, and to be authentic with your colleagues is key. Um, I believe that building relationships actually helps break down the silos. And being curious about what others are working on allows me to learn what is happening within teams. And this has given new and improved insight as I continue to evolve my career. And I've used every opportunity to connect with my colleagues, both professionally and personally. And that gives me space for information gathering and sharing.
Hmm.
And I think you need to leave space for those things.
Yeah, interesting. Um, Something that I've learned over time is if you, just in terms of relationship building, is if you want people to like you, ask them questions about them. And if you want them to trust you, tell them about yourself.
That's right. That's
So a
right.
little bit of a back and forth. So all right, we're gonna go back. Let's go back to small companies. So
Mhm.
how can they successfully prioritize regulatory tasks when time and funding and personnel are in short supply?
This is where leaders really need to be uh, uh, be mindful
Mm,
of this. You need to consider that focusing on critical tasks in limited time become a daily approach. No day is the same. You need to be thinking through that. And it's likely that as a small company, you have one or two products, which allows for what I call all in thinking.
mm,
And all in means that everyone in the organization is working on the same product and can be flexible with workload. So you're constantly thinking about what is the most important thing I need to work on today.
mm,
Um, Teams need to learn how to perform tasks such as protocol development and clinical study reports that might be allocated to medical writing alone in larger companies. You have to be willing to do something you haven't done before,
mm,
and be able to pitch in if needed. I've also found that the use of contractors and consultants allows considerable support for smaller organizations. If it doesn't need to be done by the company, it's okay to use a contractor consultant. And these roles fill in for possible full-time employees without occupying a sustained role that we're not sure about.
mhm.
Ultimately, you learn you can't sweat the small stuff because there's just no time for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's talk about communication. So, what role does communication, both internal and cross-functional, play in determining whether large or small organizations are more challenging to navigate?
I'm not certain the size of an organization is more or less challenging when the focus is on communication. I think
Okay.
communication is challenging regardless of size.
Hmm.
It may appear that there are clearer channels of communication in larger organizations, since there's likely to be a defined understanding of the company's communication mechanisms, right? There may be governance, there may be ways that communication is shared. But I actually think the most important tool for communication in any organization is intentional relationship building, particularly cross-functionally. You said earlier, right? If you want someone to, have a relationship with you, ask about themselves. If you want them to trust you, you must be vulnerable with them.
Hmm.
And I think developing relationships with and across program teams are critical. That is how work gets done. Um, and when communication breaks down in a team, timelines drift, clinical studies fail, risks increase. So, risk management requires open and transparent information flow, and you can't mitigate a risk that you do not know about. And if you don't talk about them, you don't know about them. I think communication is critical to success of any organization, regardless of size.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we're kind of transitioning into this topic of culture. So let's take a look at that. So, how would you say that culture, and we're talking about risk averse versus risk tolerant, slow moving versus agile, how does that
Mhm.
influence regulatory success across both large and small companies?
This is a very interesting question. And I'm not sure risk culture influences success, but I do think it influences approach.
Okay.
Um, and I've seen it noted that a risk tolerant organization doesn't eliminate risk, but it means aligning strategy with action. So, socializing risk, understanding what actions you can take, and sometimes accepting risk. That's an critical a part of it. And I think risk tolerance sets the tone within an organization. Particularly in small companies, risk is an inherent element of working. At any time, a larger company can acquire you. Um, Products may not be successful, right? It's an inherent element. I suspect it's an inherent element in large organizations as well. And when you're working on one or two products, time and resources are not readily available. So it's critical that you have to move effectively, efficiently, often quickly. And so you're going to have to take risks. So, what does that mean, taking risks? And I've been thinking a little bit about this. And a request for fast track designation came to mind.
Okay.
And then it talks about this particular designation says a therapy has the potential to improve, right? You don't have to prove it, has the potential. And this potential is not always fully understood early in development. And
Hmm.
so you have to decide as an organization, is it worth your time and resource to put the work in to request this designation when the result may not be the
Hmm.
desired outcome?
Hmm.
And I think when we talk about risk tolerance is, are we okay with no? Um,
Hmm.
and culture supports that. So when people know that they won't perhaps be punished for thoughtful, good faith decisions that involve risks, they make decisions faster.
Hmm.
And I think this mindset catalyzes speed because employees aren't waiting for certainty. They're optimizing for informed movement, right? That to me is a great way to think about risk tolerance. Not so much you don't have it, but that you can work with it.
Hmm. Excellent. Um, I think all of us as workers, colleagues, and so on and so forth, we want to, provide the greatest impact that we can provide. And sometimes we have to decide, which environment is going to allow me to create that greatest impact. Is it a structured enterprise? Is it a dynamic startup? So can you kind of speak a little bit to that?
So this has actually been the core of my career is understanding that balance between enterprise, structured enterprise, and dynamic startups. I will say I wasn't sure I would ever go to a small company or a startup. I thought it was too small, it's too risky. But the more that I've thought about it, I actually really love it. And I think the choice usually to work in a startup is driven by long-term career goals, comfort with staying in the technical space while leading and building a team.
Mm,
Often we will say, we're really flying the plane while we're building it.
right.
And motivation within a product pipeline. And for me, it's those with rare disease indications.
Mm,
Um, and although outsourcing may seem like an easy fix, right, in dynamic startups, it often comes with a need to have careful oversight. So you're often doing a lot of oversight, even if you're not doing the work. Um, Systems, processes, procedures are often light and may not sustain scalability. And as a leader, there's a greater need for you to ensure compliance while trying to maintain speed.
mm,
Choosing a structured enterprise, which I've been in as well, it has also been driven by career needs, growth, and focus. You don't have to focus on developing processes, procedures, and systems. Certainly improving them, yes, but not necessarily building them. The workforce resources can be more abundant, and there's little need to wear many hats. And so it allows you to work on diverse programs, products in all stages of development, and it's more available in a structured environment. Speed may not be the most critical driver in a large company, although compliance is always important for both startups and structured enterprises. Ultimately, I think it comes down to risk tolerance in your career.
mm,
If thinking about a dynamic startup, yes, it takes risk, but you have such an opportunity to learn and learn about yourself. And in a large organization, same thing applies. You just learn a different way.
mm. Well, let's continue down that path of risk. So, one of the things that kind of comes with this space is, regulatory failures or near misses. So, what types of regulatory failures or what I said, near misses would occur more frequently in large organizations and which ones more so in small ones?
So I guess it matters how we define a failure or a near miss.
Okay.
So I thought about how I would define this question and how I define it. So I'm not sure if failure and near miss is sort of similar to how others think about it, but I think about it as not taking a bit of regulatory risk.
Mm,
So it's possible at large organizations, you may not choose. to have a risky interaction with a health authority if success is not absolute or guaranteed. I guess you could call that a failure, that you didn't take the chance when you had it.
Right.
Um, for some organizations, requesting expedited regulatory mechanisms such as breakthrough therapy or PRIME in Europe may not be something a larger company focuses on. There are no guarantees on obtaining that designation. So why would we put resources to it if it's not a given? Um, so, but if I think about that in contrast, right? Large organizations may have other avenues to increase interaction. So risk can be minimized that way.
Mm.
That's not necessarily the case at smaller organizations. Um, Smaller organizations may need, right, to be okay with what I defined as a failure or near miss. It may not be guaranteed, success may not be guaranteed, but you have to try. And I think how I look at that is that in a smaller organization, we have to take advantage of opportunities that may be considered risky,
Mm.
particularly when you're working in the rare disease setting.
Mm.
Um, People who live with these diseases don't have time for us to, not think about how we move things quickly. So I think failure near miss for me is like not taking regulatory risk.
Okay, great. I was just kind of reminded of this idea of good decisions and bad decisions because when we make bad decisions, we live with the consequences of those decisions. When we make good decisions, the tragedy is that we don't get to see the trauma that was avoided, right? And so
Mhm.
I think just for anybody listening to this podcast, if you made a really risky decision and it turned out good, just try to take a moment to appreciate what you were able to avoid, right? Um, well, it wouldn't be an awesome podcast unless we talked about my favorite topic, which is AI. So let's talk about AI.
Mhm.
And how does AI and at this moment in time, how is that affecting the regulatory space in large companies and small companies?
Yes. So, new technologies and AI are now and will continue to reshape the regulatory landscape. Um, but I'm not sure that reshaping is different when considering size, but I do think the difference may show up in the ability to adopt new technologies or AI, because you need to be aware and you need to be integrating that into the organization. Um, Thinking about this, I remember many years ago, we submitted paper documents to health authorities.
Yep.
And with the
Boxes.
boxes and boxes, right? Pallets. Um, with the introduction of regulatory information management systems, or what we call RIM systems, submissions to health authorities became much easier um, because we did everything electronically. We didn't
Hmm.
need to do paper anymore. And while these systems are no longer considered new, large and small companies use RIM systems to support documentation. You don't submit paper anymore. And I think everyone uses them. But it takes a little while to adopt the right system for your organization. And that takes a little bit longer in a small company. I think new technologies and adopting those technologies may be faster at larger companies, although it may take time. With a larger workforce, researching the landscape and the technologies that support those adaptations may be quicker because you have
Mm.
more eyes on them. And the necessary approvals might require time within the organization, but there's a clear way to do that. Um, Thinking about smaller organizations, I think it's possible that financial constraints may impact new technologies at smaller companies. It's harder to bring new things in. Because budgets are smaller, so companies may need to make calculated choices about introducing anything new.
Mm.
And determining the needs, you may have to put a slight hold on introducing those technologies until the budget is reshaped. Um, One area that is beginning to evolve is the use of AI in medical writing. And this is something that I was looking into recently, because AI is starting to support the acceleration of accurate and efficient documentation. And I understand it's a very powerful tool with a structured framework, as long as it has its guidance.
Hmm.
Um, it can write a clinical study report. What it can't do is it can't interpret your results, right? So, one of the things that will allow medical writing to do is they can shift the attention from writing, in a structured framework, but to strategy and messaging.
Hmm.
And I think that's going to be a key driver for us, as we move forward. So we spend more time on content, messaging, interpretation than format and comment reconciliation. So I think AI is really going to shift um, that approach in every organization.
Yep, I concur. Well, Tammy, this has been a real awesome podcast. I really appreciate your insight into some of the different regulatory challenges that lie, not just in large and small companies, but kind of the similarities among both of them. So, before we close, what would you like to leave the audience with?
I think what I'd love to leave the audience with is that there's actually really no right answer. You just have to be the right person for the right size.
Hmm.
I've enjoyed working at every organization that I've worked on because I've learned something new each time. And with that, I think that's where I want people to think about not size, but think about what matters, and matters from a regulatory leadership perspective. And I think you can obtain that.
Okay, excellent. Tammy, thank you again. Really appreciate it. For everyone listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. Subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast, and follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn for industry updates and cutting edge insights. If you'd like to talk about project or resource needs, just head over to thefdagroup.com to check us out and get in touch, or you can connect with me personally on LinkedIn. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you on the next rundown.
Thank you, Nicholas.